If you're interested in paganism, its theology and ethics, stay tuned because you're just about to find out. Hello, everyone. I'm Angela, and welcome to my symposium. I'm a PhD and a university lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, paganism, shamanism, and related currents. Today, I have the pleasure to have here on my symposium Professor Michael York. Michael York is Professor Emeritus at Bath Spa University in England. He specializes in paganism and has published several books, including but not limited to Pagan Theology, Pagan Ethics, and pagan mysticism. He has lived in New York City, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Varanasi. And currently, the pandemic permitting, between London, Amsterdam, and France. So please help me in welcoming Professor York. Hello, Michael. How are you today?
I'm fine, Angela. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. It's a sunny day outside, which is a rare thing in England.
It's already clouded over in London, so you're lucky.
Yeah. Thank you for being on my symposium. I'm really happy to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
So the first question that I'd like to ask you is to give us an overview of what paganism is so that we know what we are talking about in case there is any of our viewers that are not familiar with what paganism is.
I actually have a definition of paganism, which I never can remember, and I won't try to look it up right now. But basically, and I'm talking now right now in terms of ideal types. It's a construct that the sociologist of religion uses. And what the sociologist of religion does is tries to figure out a particular ideal of religion. And then when we're actually examining religions, we try to find out how close do they come to the ideal, where they diverge from the ideal, and why do they diverge from the ideal. So basically, my understanding of religion in an overall sense is that there's essentially four ideal types. And very quickly, one is the Abrahamic ideal type of religion. Then you have a Dharmic type. Then you have pagan, and you have secular. The pagan and the secular are similar in being basically focused on this world, not concerned with a world to follow, what is coming afterwards. Whereas both the Dharmic religions, the Abrahamic religions, and again, remember, there's always going to be exceptions. So when you're looking at Judaism, Judaism is not really focused on the next world, but with Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, they're somehow focused not primarily on the here and the now, as both secularism and paganism are. The other differences would be the Dharmic religions basically would think of the magical as a negative. The Abrahamic religions also kind of feel the same. But they all recognize it, and paganism recognizes the magical. Secularism does not. It doesn't believe in the magical. It's more strictly the empirical world of the here and the now is what a secular focus would be. And so basically what I understand of paganism is that it's dealing with its understanding of the world, what we might just loosely call the supernatural, and humanity, what the relations between those three are. And so it accepts the world as real. It also accepts the whole notion of enchantment or magic as also being real. And it sees the human as being part of the real, not the exclusive part, but an important part. So it's very similar to secularism in one sense, but unlike secularism, it entertains the whole concept of enchantment and the magical. So whether that really explains paganism, it's you almost can't, because there is no authority within the whole the pagan world that says this is what we believe, this is what we don't believe. We don't have a pope, we don't have mullahs in a pagan framework. So it's a diversified spirituality, and it's pluralistic in the sense that there's many different forms. And so in that sense, it's kind of like both, well, it's like all of them, because they all are very diversified. If you look at the Abrahamic religion, if you look at Christianity alone, it's as diversified as just about anything could be. And the same with the Dharmic religions, the same with secular. You have humanists, you have atheists, you have agnostics. So you have a whole range there. But paganism, it is probably where it differs from Abrahamic Christian and even Islamic spirituality. Each one feels that they have the truth, they are correct. In paganism, you don't seem to find exclusive truth claims. Pagans seem to be open to the fact that, you know, this is one position, but there are other positions which are just as legitimate as my own or whoever is speaking.
It's more relativist and more inclusivist, we may say.
Yes, yeah, those are good terms for it.
Yeah, that is a definition that I often mention about that was written by the French anthropologist Marc Auger, who defines pagan religions as being more inclusivist, as opposed to the Abrahamic religions, which tend to be more exclusivist and based on the idea that there is only one God and hence only one truth.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, that's very true about pagan.
That's very true. It's very true or not. If you have,
Well, I mean, it is how paganism seems to be operating. I mean, whether they're correct or not, that's a whole other matter. But
yeah. I was trying to make a joke.
okay.
But yeah, I agree. And since the viewers of my channel tend to gravitate more around the practice of magic and witchcraft and related practices, I was wondering, what role does magic play in paganism?
Oh, gosh. A lot. It's how do you distinguish magic from enchantment? Magic is a practice. It's something that one does. Enchantment is the wonder of things, and it's what one experiences. So, but you have many different approaches to magic throughout the pagan world. And you have Thelema, which comes from Aleister Crowley. You have a more modern version called chaos magic, which is kind of a even more rebellious form. But then you have some simple things. A lot of people identify kitchen magic, and the magic with using herbs, with cooking, something very immediate, domestic, and personal. In London and throughout the UK, I guess, I don't know if it still exists, but there was a whole movement called Dragon. And Dragon was very much involved with ecology and using magic as a means to try to protect the earth and to further ecological aims and ends and so forth. And then you have Wiccan magic, and Wicca employs magic with the understanding of this threefold return, that whatever you put out is going to come back to you 3 times stronger or 3 times. You have witchcraft itself, which is more involved with herbs, use of herbs, and plants and so forth, and casting of spells. So some of it's controversial. It can be more negative. It doesn't see witchcraft more broadly doesn't necessarily endorse the Wiccan idea of the threefold return. And then you have, I guess, all the different traditions have some understanding of magic. For the heathens, for the northerners, it would be the Sather practices. So it's not exclusively, because you also have you have all kinds of pagans. So you have a whole atheistic branch of paganism, or a secular branch of paganism, which doesn't employ the concept of magic. They deny that that's a viable practice and that it has any real reality. So, but within those other ones, other denominations that kind of basically believe in the gods, or in animistic spirits, or some sort of otherworld reality. Magic is one. It's a consequence, and it's also an approach to these other dimensions. So it's you really it. All I can really say is that magic is something that's found throughout the pagan mindset. Not not everyone accepts it; it can be rejected, but it's something that it's people talk in terms of the magical metaphor, so it's very often used. And for instance, when with the dragon uh, orientation, and this was in London, we had originally, I think it was called Talking Stick, was a group, and then it became the Secret Chiefs. But when there was a success in stopping a road going through a forest or whatnot, Dragon always claimed that as a result of their magic. So it was kind of the idiom of exchange between people, as much as it was anything else. Now, I'm not sure I really answered that question, but
Yeah,
that's
I think you did.
all right.
I guess that I was particularly interested in learning from you. Um, how pivotal and how core the practice of magic is to paganism, because of course there are pagans who won't practice magic, but
Mhm.
is a magical outlook and a magical thinking still imbued in their way of engaging with paganism?
I would say, for the most part, yes, very definitely, that magic is a part of pagan practice.
Yeah, because if we are to also consider as magical the re-enchantment of the word, which is something that it's a kind of a buzzword in our field.
Yeah,
uh, but yeah, this idea that the world is not made of inanimate objects anymore, but there is some kind of interactiveness that human beings can have with the world, that could be also considered magical thinking, even for those pagans that don't actively cast spells.
very true, very true. And I mean, and especially with animism, and from a more academic perspective, someone like Graham Harvey argues that animism is the recognition of personhood. Um, I have some questions with that, but that's on a different level. But he argues that, and Graham doesn't practice magic, but he feels that the whole emphasis is connecting with the personhood of various things, uh, including rocks, trees, rivers, and so forth. Um, so it's magical. It's not necessarily practicing magic, but it's encountering a magical dimension. And I think that's probably the wider area of paganism overall, is trying to encounter the magical dimension along with the this worldly dimension of nature and the world and even humanity.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. I think that also another way, since you know that I study magic a lot for even inside and outside paganism, but something that also quite fascinates me is the idea of magic or magical thinking or a magical outlook on reality, which is based on connection. And that would also include other human beings. So,
Mhm.
like, because if you don't have that idea that there is a stark separation between you and other people, that could also be seen as a form of magical thinking or a magical outlook on reality. And that also fosters a different level of connection.
Absolutely. Uh, the buzzword now is that everything is connected, and that seems to be what more and more people are saying, and that's throughout the whole cosmos, that there's no separation. We're all interconnected, and
Very, very hermetic philosophy and Neoplatonist as an idea.
it is and it isn't. That we'll get to that point too, I'm sure. But all right, let's go back to paganism for a minute. Um, my own understanding is that there are two basically different types of paganism. There's a pantheistic idea that sees the divine or the magical or the spiritual as immanent in reality. But there's also and something closer to more the Abrahamic, uh, in the sense that the divine can be something completely separate, and that's a more Gnostic, theosophical kind of position, and it tends to devalue the physical, tangible world. And so you have this whole concept of the soma sema, that the body is a tomb, it's a prison. And in a Gnostic approach, what you're trying to do is to uh, escape the physical. This is where you get, this is Plato, this is even Neoplatonic, um, and continues on with Ficino and so forth. Um, it's and so there. So I understand a Gnostic position of paganism as opposed to a Telluric position. The Telluric is not trying to escape the physical, but and if there is reincarnation, it's something that's welcomed, because uh, from that perspective, you want to be incarnated. You want to experience the earth, and physicality. Now there is a panentheist, am I saying it right? Panentheist position. Whitehead and I can't think of his name right now, uh, which kind of accepts the divinity of the world, but also has divinity as something greater than the world. I find that the person who really expresses the more Telluric pagan position is Robert Corrington, who says there is nothing outside of nature. Nature encompasses all that is, including the magical, the enchantment, the other world. They're all products of nature and still belong to nature. One expression that I tend to use is, I consider nature as something that's empirical, and co-nature, which is also part of nature, but it's a non-empirical. It's a more of a value-oriented understanding. But in the magic of paganism, the co-natural has its own ontological reality. It's not an empirical one. You can't approach it as you can, through a laboratory or uh, under controlled circumstances. But for many people, it has a reality. And you'll find this not just in paganism, this exists, of course, in the Abrahamic religions, because their understanding of the Godhead is not something that can be demonstrated empirically, and yet it's something that's accepted as real. And pagans, in that sense, follow something very similar. So there is then again the idea of this panentheistic thing that's beyond nature. Uh, there are many pagans that I know that do take that position as well. But then I know many atheistic pagans, and I know many Telluric pagans. And I think mostly they're Telluric, although a lot of people are fascinated by Neoplatonism. And so that's a very important part of the overall pagan conversation.
Mm. Are atheistic pagans still engaging with magic?
Ceremonially, perhaps, what's his name? Mark Green and his atheopaganism. Uh, he will, they will have rituals. Um, they don't believe there's a reality, but they will go through the ritual as a drama, as something that has emotional return, as as you would possibly get by going to a theater piece. But this is one where everyone is participating in the theater piece themselves. So, and then of course, for a lot of atheist pagans, they strictly see the magical as part of nature itself. And so I think that's an understanding of the magical that all pagans tend to share, both those who more overtly believe in the magical and practice magic, and those who eschew it and deny that it's a reality, but they all see nature as herself or itself as something magical, the miracle of life itself.
Yeah, that's interesting because in this sense, pagans see magic in nature regardless of reading a god within it or not. So it's like it's independent on of what kind of view of God or godness or lack thereof they
Yeah,
hold. It is more about re-imbuing nature with magic.
yes, yes.
With being living and sentient, I guess. Like every part of nature is
All right, except that I don't think it's we re-imbuing nature. Nature is all that. It's our recognition
mm,
of nature. We're not making nature magical. Nature is magical, and we're developing our ability to recognize that, to see that, and to work with it and try to protect it.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. I was
Uh,
also wondering across the different, you mentioned a few different magical traditions within the umbrella of paganism. I was wondering, is there a specific philosophical underpinning to the different pagan traditions and that engage with witchcraft?
I basically think not. I mean, not. I mean, everyone has their own kind of theological understanding, um, and I mean, even in atheism is a form of theology. It's a denial of the theos. But whether there's one grounding philosophy, I think it is recognition of the sacredness of the earth, but I don't know if that is really a philosophy. I suppose it could be. But that seems to be the widest common denominator. And there probably are pagans that would even deny that, especially from the more Gnostic transcendental perspective. But in general, pagans revere nature, revere the earth, and I think a major reason why paganism is having its rebirth at our times is because our planet is under such ecological threat, and we seem to be destroying the natural balance of nature. And more people are recognizing that. The metaphor I always use is that we take our parents when we're young more or less for granted. I mean, we love them, but we take them for granted. But as we get older and they get older, we realize that we're not going to have them forever. And we start becoming more mindful of the importance of our parents. And I think that's exactly what's happening with Mother Nature in an overall sense today, that we're recognizing that Mother Nature is not as permanent and indestructible as we just automatically assumed, uh, at a less mindful state of collective existence. And I think the world itself is becoming aware of climate change, um, pollution, all these things. And I think paganism is very much a spiritual reaction to that recognition. So if that's really a philosophy,
I guess it can be. Yeah. And what about the ethics and the morals in paganism? How do pagans construct their ethical system?
all right. I think one of the most important things for a pagan is the whole idea of freedom, liberty, the ability to choose what one does, what one wants to do, and what one wants to believe in, or what one does believe in. So there's this whole undergrounding of cherishing the whole notion of freedom. Um, and then along with that, there is the notion of honoring nature, honoring people, um, and especially and increasingly recognizing the intrinsic dignity of the individual, of people, but not just people, but of all life in nature and of nature itself. So there's this, so it's freedom and honor. But I also think another ethic is the idea of appreciating the gift of life, the gift of nature. And to appreciate that, pagans tend to endorse pleasure rather than to deny pleasure. Again, from a more Gnostic perspective, in which the physical is considered a negative, then you often try to escape the physical. And so from that perspective, pleasure is not something that is celebrated. But for the wider pagan world, I think very much they're oriented to the pleasure aspects of life, and not trying to deny the pleasurable or escape from it, but endorsing it and being free with it. So what else is there? I think another ethic is health itself, is an emphasis on health, and that's both the health of the individual, the health of the community, the health of one's society, and the ultimate health of the whole world, of nature itself. Again, it becomes an ecological concern. But that's very much part of what the ethical, I think, is for the pagan. And And then there's a whole element of being, not just being passive in accepting reality and pleasure and so forth, but contributing to contributing something. So being productive, and then being able to be generous with what one produces and being able to share that with others. So you have this range of ethical positions that I think basically delineate paganism in an overall sense.
So to summarize, it's like freedom,
Honor,
hedonism.
yeah, or even hedonism, pleasure, also just basic understanding what comfort, the needs of comfort. We all basically want to be as comfortable as we can. And paganism doesn't fight that. Paganism accepts that, unless you're going through some Sundance ritual with the Native Americans and all that, and you pierce yourself with hooks and things. That's exceptional. But overall, I think paganism and pagans endorse the acceptance of being comfortable in life, and then being productive and being generous.
By the way, the wind in the background of your room sounds like spirits moving or something.
We get that here. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it. I
No,
have all the
that's
windows
fine.
shut.
That's fine. I guess that my viewers will like it. It kind of sets the
It's there. It's part of nature.
yes. So yeah, we were saying that to summarize the ethics in paganism, we have freedom or liberty, we have hedonism or seeking pleasure and embracing comfort in life, and then the need for meaning, perhaps, to find purpose in something bigger than themselves, and often in relation to ecology and. Is
So,
that correct?
yes, one of the words I might use to summarize a lot of it is the word worship. And worship in the sense that, I mean, if you look at it, the term etymologically, worship is the making or creating of value, of worth. And so when one encounters one's understanding of the gods or the divine, and you're worshiping it, you're creating it in some sense. And so recognizing the intrinsic dignity of the individual, that's a form of worship. It's a recognition or a making of value, of the valuable. And so I would basically say worship, freedom, health, and comfort. And worship, I understand, is accepting the gift. So that's the hedonistic, enjoying life, not denying pleasures, but also being part of life and creating something positive, and then sharing that thing, not just holding it to yourself, but sharing it and helping others as well. So
it's interesting because you don't quite have the idea of good versus evil, or the idea that the gods will sort of tell you what is good and what is evil, or the idea of a reward, or the kind of ethical patterns that you see in Abrahamic religions.
no, I don't think pagans have that at all. I mean, pagans recognize that there is a better or more endorsable behavior, but there's also, and they recognize that there's harmful behavior. But to break that down into a dichotomy of good versus evil, that is not something that paganism seems to embrace, that concept.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And now I have a few questions from my patrons. The first one is from Andrew. And Andrew is asking whether the pagan ethics is constrained by the morals and norms of the larger societies they are part of, or are their morals and ethics independent from the society and culture they live in?
I think they're very much involved with the society that one lives in. And I mean, unless you're trying to cause a revolution or be a rebel, and that's always an element because that's part of a pagan freedom. But basically, to be comfortable is to be part of the world that one lives in, and so you abide by the wider morality, or you try to interpret the wider morality in your own terms. So, I mean, part of my family is militantly anti-vaxxer. I'm not there, but they are, and they will demonstrate. They will protest, and they're pagans. They're druids in this case. Um, Now, is that going against the wider morals of let's say our Western culture? It isn't, because our Western culture allows within its ethical uh, remit that one can protest, one can uh, present a different position and argue, and if necessary, even fight for that position. But they're still working within an overall uh, pagan, or not pagan, but ethical construct. And I think wherever you are, you have to. I mean, I suppose if I was in Saudi Arabia, I would not openly uh, be performing idolatrous worship before an altar or an idol or a figure of a deity. Um, I might do it more privately, but you want to survive. So just on a survival basis alone, we have to conform to uh, be mindful at least of the wider position, and be very mindful of when we're going against it and what the possible consequences might be in that case.
And also, to follow up on your argument regarding whether being anti-vaxxers as pagans means to be countercultural, I guess that another element, another trait of our Western society is pluralism. So it's like you are allowed to have different opinions. Yeah, but of course, yeah, that's kind of a very difficult position to have at this moment.
It is, and our wider society, we may endorse the principle of pluralism, but we, in practice, that often just doesn't work out that way. And so there's a lot more racism and um, gender inequality, um, all sorts of things. So um, we speak in terms of pluralism, and because we speak in it, that's probably the best ethical avenue to follow. But we also have to be mindful of the very fact that we're not quite as pluralistic as we would like to believe we are, or that we say we are. So it's always the whole ethical position of the individual and the community is always a negotiable position. There's no fixed stance. You're always adjusting to whatever developments there are, what changes there are, and and also to your own changes of belief and expansion of concepts. So as you develop, your whole negotiation with the wider world also goes through a change.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Another question that Andrew has for you is, could animism be seen as a foundation of pagan theology, a current running through it, or is animism a separate belief system altogether?
Well, it certainly isn't a separate belief system altogether, but it's probably one of the more common foundations to a lot of pagan belief. Um,
Perhaps even part of the idea of re-enchantment that we were talking
oh,
about
very,
in the
very
beginning.
definitely that, yes. Uh, um, to re-enchant the world, as Max Weber was talking about, is in part recognizing the animistic substratum of existence, of the world about us, of things about us, of nature itself and the things within nature. Um, I wouldn't say that that's exclusively, that describes exclusively the pagan position. Uh, some pagans really understand deity as concrete entities and individuals, and they may be more focused on that rather than the animism uh, as an undercurrent. But they they often do interrelate, and I would say that animism is a very strong, if philosophical is the right word, but a strong kind of belief current throughout much of paganism.
Then we have a question from Mike. Mike mentions the theologian Keith Wood, who maintains that people have devoted their lives to the belief in the Christian God, but no one seriously believes in Zeus. What do you think about the perception that believing in pagan gods is not as legitimate as the belief in the Christian God?
Well, I mean, in the Old Testament, you have Yahweh saying he doesn't really deny the existence of the other gods, but he says that they're not worth it. I'm the only one that's worth it. So, and that's a very kind of arrogant position to take, and pagans don't accept that position. So, many pagans fully believe in Zeus and other deities and see them as real. They tend not to see their understanding of deity as omnipotent, as Yahweh claims to be, um, but as powerful possible allies. Um, and a lot of people, so for some people, and I've known many pagans who the gods are very real entities to them. But for a lot of other people, the gods are metaphors. They have an ontological reality of their own. They're not empirical, but they are metaphors for some type of a reality which is operative. And so Zeus could be, for some people, one of these kind of metaphors for a reality, for uh, the personification of luminescence, of light, uh, of the fertility of the rainstorm, um, all these different things. But and very often behind the various pagan understandings of deity and gods and goddesses, they uh, how does this fit into what we're talking about?
Metaphoric.
Oh, this is the metaphor. Um, so where was it now? All right. So the gods are metaphors, but they also have physical natural realities. So you have a metaphor of the sun god, but you also have the sun. You have the moon god or goddess, but you have the very moon itself. You have Gaia, but you have the earth. You have Zeus as thunder and lightning. So they may be metaphors, but they also have a physical basis. And so what many pagans are doing are personifying these physical realities, distinct from Yahweh, Elohim of the Abrahamic tradition, but personifying them and then interacting with them through a metaphorical, imaginative approach.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if that really has answered Mike's question, but I would say for some pagans, Zeus is just as real, or is even more real.
Yeah, I would say that I don't want to ask on your behalf, but I can propose an answer, and then you can tell me what you think about it.
Mhm.
I feel that the idea that the belief in pagan gods is not as legitimate as the belief in the Christian God is a viewpoint that is held by Christian theologians, perhaps, and that is a biased understanding of how pagans engage with their gods. So the idea that pagans don't believe that Zeus is a real god, what is a real god? The kind of perception of God that Christians have? Or is the realness of gods, something that every religious movement or every religion should decide for themselves?
Oh, well, I think definitely pagans feel everyone should decide for themselves, but for pagans, reality is the physical earth. And for many pagans, the whole Abrahamic concept of God is a fiction in itself. It has no more reality than, or it isn't as real as something like lightning or the earth, the lake, the river. These are real. These are not imaginative creations. Um, when you talk about a theologian, at least a theologian will dismiss the pagan concept of understanding God. But I just got an email yesterday where someone was working for a bakery chain in the United States, and during her break, her boss said, I'm a Christian. What do you believe in? And she said, well, I'm a pagan. And then just sort of walked away. Well, ultimately, they said, you're going to rot in hell. So, I mean, this is a belief system. This is what often happens. This is not the theologian speaking. These are the people themselves speaking. And the woman, both, and her husband also worked for the bakery. They kept cutting down the hours, and finally, because they said you're going to rot in hell, they fired them. And so all the latest thing is that the pagan was now suing, but so I don't know what's going to come of that. But that's a product of that kind of Christian theology, in which there is a very strict good and evil, and
And pagans don't have that.
no, pagans aren't accepting God as the all good and everything. And so they're going to go to hell.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Mike is also asking whether there is a consensus among scholars as to whether Wicca is part of paganism or not.
Oh, I would think so. Um, I mean, Wicca is. I mean, I see Wicca itself as the midwife of the contemporary pagan movement. It was what really has given birth to it. Personally, I see Wicca as being there's a Gnostic undercurrent. Um, it it derives in part from Freemasonry, and it sort of accepts that understanding of, for instance, the elements. Um, it puts, like Freemasonry does, it places Earth in the north because that's the most barren of the four dimensions, and so it's ultimately a denial of the Earth. Now, I don't think Wiccans themselves recognize that that's what they're doing, but that's the tradition that they come out of. Um, and to put air, which air should really be in the north, put air in the east, from a wider pagan and more traditional pagan perspective, fire belongs in the east. That's where the sun rises. That's where the flame first appears. That's where they would put the ritual fire in the east to welcome and greet the rising sun. So and I think throughout more of the ethnic denominational forms of paganism, there's more of a recognition of this more natural understanding. But Wicca itself, coming from that free Masonic position, it's not Telluric paganism. It's more Gnostic paganism. It still is pagan, and again, there is no authority that can say something is or is not pagan. If someone makes the claim, and I think most academics recognize this, that they are pagan, then they're accepted as pagan. And then the debate can follow from there. But there is no authority to say that you're not a pagan. And so that becomes a problem within the contemporary pagan world because of the focused heathen position, which becomes very racist, um, very, very ethnically and community oriented. And paganism itself tends to be more cosmopolitan and more universal and more inclusive and not exclusive. But then it cannot say that these heathen focused or Asatru or whatever they are not pagan. They are as legitimately pagan as all the rest are.
But not all heathens are racist, aren't they?
No. It is an element that does seem to get a lot of attention,
It's a
especially.
marginal element that gets a lot of attention in social media and media in general, because polarized, shocking things
In a way,
always
but
get
we
more
don't really
attention.
know how marginal it ultimately is. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, it could be much bigger. It seems to be quite widespread. It seems to be more dominant in certain areas and in certain countries than in others. But and it's an ongoing debate, and there are many more inclusive pagans who want to deny that it's truly pagan, the focused position. But they can't really. I mean, they can argue against it and say that it doesn't represent the wider picture of paganism, but it still is part of the big tent of paganism. It still falls within it. So,
Yeah, it's difficult, as you said, to say how marginal it is. There should be, studies conducted, like sociological studies, and
yeah, well, that's what we're doing, and but I don't think so. What was it? Were we still talking about the Wicca?
yeah,
I
we
mean,
started with Wicca, and
yeah,
we ended up
we
with
ended
Adam
up
Ray.
with yeah, it's all right. But I mean, I think from the academic perspective, we're not academics are not in a position to say this is or this isn't. We have to just look at what the overall picture is and how it interplays between itself and then from itself to the wider world. And we're not making judgments in that sense, saying that this is legitimate and this is not legitimate. This is just what is, and we're trying to understand the mechanisms and the principles and belief systems behind it.
Yeah, and the cultural, the cultural elements and how
It
they interact with the wider cultural system and these kind of things.
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
We have one last question from Jamie Young, who wants to ask whether there is the concept of ultimate reality in paganism, meaning an all pervasive or underlying reality behind all forms and appearance, like the universal principle Brahman in Hinduism, for example.
Again, going back to the panentheist position, the panentheist would say yes. The pantheist would say the ultimate principle is the whole cosmos itself, the physical reality of the cosmos. Um, but ultimately, pagans don't tend to talk in terms of ultimate and absolutes. Everything is relative, everything is open, everything is flexible, everything is negotiable, debatable, and they tend not to think in absolutist terms. So the whole idea of an ultimate God, such as you have with Abrahamic religion, or an ultimate reality, even in the Dharmic religions, and the idea that all of this that we see is Maya or illusion. Um, Pagans don't talk in those terms, don't entertain that kind of a conceptual construct. So, if that answers that question,
Yeah, I think it does.
I always enjoy any type of exchange with you. I think you're delightful,
Oh,
and
thank you.
I like the way you think, which is refreshing, and you don't find that very often. So that's something that's very welcomed and appreciated.
Is it
And
different the way I think?
and anything to add? No, I think paganism. The thing that I find that is beautiful with paganism is its basic positive attitude towards everything, towards the world, towards life, towards nature. Um, I think it's very important, as I've already said, because of the environmental ecological crisis that our whole human species is facing. And so I think that's why paganism is becoming more recognized throughout the world. I think it has a long ways to go. If you look at the world in an overall sense, half of the world is Abrahamic. Christianity and Islam are just slightly over 50% of the people of the whole planet. The Dharmic religions are about 1/5, and uh, the secularists are about another fifth. And so within that little, maybe 10%, is the pagan perspective. That being said, if you look at the other religions, such as Christianity and Islam and so forth, you will also find a very, very strong pagan undercurrent present. They're not strictly this theological perspective versus vis-a-vis that theological perspective. They have pagan elements. Um, I mean, this is quite controversial, but the Kaaba in Mecca was originally a pagan shrine, and the idea of the Hajj going to that pagan shrine once a year and focusing your prayers towards that thing, that's really a pagan inheritance that is part of Islam. Christianity has lots of, I mean, the creation of Christianity is utilizing uh, pagan constructs of the dying rising Lord. Um, you have um, again the whole veneration of saints and relics and so forth is again a physical kind of material religion, which is ultimately could be argued as a pagan uh, practice or a pagan kind of a concept. So I mean, the student of religion can find pagan elements throughout most of the world's religions at the same time. So as paganism itself may not be nominally that much a part of the religious spectrum, especially if the Abrahamic religions are half and so forth, but it's much wider in a sub-rosa.
It's more pervasive than
It's more
it is.
pervasive, yes. And maybe not articulated as pagan, definitely not, but it's something that's more present than we're necessarily aware of.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. So thank you again, Michael, for being here on Angela's Symposium. It was really a delightful conversation, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of it and what are the aspects of our conversation that you were most interested in. And if you like this video, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so that you will never miss a new upload from me. And as always, stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.